The BBC News now on BBC One Scotland with Reeta Chakrabarti and Reporting Scotland with Sarah McMullen. It's 1 o'clock.
Today at 1, Jeremy Hunt delivers his first budget as Chancellor with a focus on boosting growth and getting people back to work. Big smiles for the traditional photo. Mr Hunt told MPs he had a plan for long-term growth and what he called prosperity with a purpose.
I deliver that today by removing obstacles that stop businesses investing, by tackling labour shortages that stop them recruiting, by breaking down barriers that stop people working, and by harnessing British ingenuity to make us a science and technology superpower. Yeah.
Among the measures announced are a fuel duty freeze for 12 months and more help for pubs. This is the scene in the House of Commons right now. We'll keep you right up to date with all the announcements. And the other main stories this lunchtime. Another day of widespread industrial action as teachers in England strike over pay. Also on strike, drivers on the London Underground, civil servants and BBC local radio staff, while junior doctors in England are on their third and final day of action. And living on the edge, shoring up the Norfolk coastline, where homes have been lost to erosion.
And on Reporting Scotland, we'll have more on the budget and what that means for you and Scotland. And the UK government says it does not accept that a Sikh activist from Dumbarton was tortured while in an Indian jail.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Jeremy Hunt is on his feet in the Commons, delivering his first budget as Chancellor to a packed House, announcing a package of moves designed to get people back to work and to promote economic growth. Widely trailed measures include plans for pensions and for extending free childcare. The Chancellor said that the independent forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility predicts that inflation will fall to 2.9% by the end of the year, and they're no longer forecasting a recession this year. Government help with energy bills is being extended for another 3 months until June, although this doesn't apply to Northern Ireland. And a planned rise in fuel duty has been scrapped, so it's frozen for now. The budget comes against a background of fragile public finances as government borrowing has gone up following its support for people struggling with the cost of living. With our first report, here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
Jeremy Hunt's big moment, months in the making. The man installed as a safe pair of hands to steady the ship after economic turmoil.
When will things actually get better, Chancellor?
Left to deliver his first budget this morning, one he said would be a budget for growth. The scene set for this showpiece: sky-high cost of living, sluggish economic growth, strikes across the public sector.
Call a Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr Hunt said the UK faced enormous challenges but was not forecast to enter recession this year and set out his plan to grow the economy.
I deliver that today by removing obstacles that stop businesses investing, by tackling labour shortages that stop them recruiting, by breaking down barriers that stop people working, and by harnessing British ingenuity to make us a science and technology superpower. Yeah.
As expected, the Chancellor announced continued help for household energy bills.
I today confirm that the energy price guarantee will remain at £2,500 for the next 3 months. This means the £2,500 cap for the typical household will remain in place when energy prices remain high, ahead of an expected fall in prices from July.
Charges will be cut for those on prepayment meters. Fuel duty is frozen, along with tax on draft beer in pubs, the Chancellor announced. On the big picture, inflation was forecast to fall to under 3% by the end of the year, and Mr Hunt confirmed defence spending would rise.
Today, following representations from our persuasive Defence Secretary, I confirm that we will add a total of £11 billion to our defence budget over the next 5 years, and it will be nearly 2.25% of GDP by 2025. We were the first large European country to commit to 2% of GDP for defence, and we will now raise that to 2.5% as soon as fiscal and economic circumstances allow.
In what was billed as a back-to-work budget, free childcare for working parents in England was expected to be expanded to cover 1- and 2-year-olds, and families on universal credit would get payments up front. Changes to how much people can save in a pension before paying extra tax was also mooted, and tax breaks for businesses were also on the cards. Labour accused the government of economic mismanagement and urged the Chancellor to show ambition to bring the UK out of what they said was managed decline. Jeremy Hunt had managed expectations for this budget. Without the tax cuts some Conservatives crave, the Chancellor will have to hope his measures can make a difference. Jonathan Blake, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now by our economics correspondent Andy Verity. He's still on his feet, but what struck you so far?
Well, it's the changed picture, really, Rita. We were expecting a recession of 2 years last time we had a fiscal event. Now we're not expecting a recession, even in a technical sense. So the contrast is there between what was expected for this year, where the OBR last time thought the economy would shrink by 1.4%, and what they're now predicting that it will grow slightly by 0.2%, and then in the years after grow more strongly. So that's a big contrast. The other big measures we've heard have been trailed, actually. The biggest one is what they're doing to try to encourage businesses to invest. Business investment has been conspicuous by its absence from the recovery from the pandemic. It's been really weak generally since Brexit. And so the government's been trying to stimulate businesses to invest more. Rishi Sunak did it when he was Chancellor with the super deductor, which was supposed to give you 130% of any money that you put into equipment. So if you spent 100 quid on equipment, you'd be able to write 130 quid off against tax. But what's happening now is they're just saying, broader than that, not just equipment, will allow you to write off everything you invest against tax, every capital measure, and that will happen in the year it's taken. So less generous on the actual tax measure, but it's broader so more people will be able to use it. And that's the big hope, to stimulate growth that way. Some other interesting measures, freezing fuel duty, we expected that. That's costing a few billion, and keeping the energy price guarantee at 2,500.
Andy, thank you very much. We'll be hearing a little bit more from you a little bit later. For the time being, thank you. Let's go now to Helen Catt, our political correspondent, who's at Millbank at Westminster for us now. And Helen, how would you say that this budget is shaping up politically?
Well, Rishi Sunak this morning told his cabinet that it was no mistake that 3 of his priorities for government were focused on the economy. And it is those promises, really, which are informing the political choices that the Chancellor is setting out on how he intends to spend the country's money over the next year. So it's no surprise then that we're getting things to address some of the cost of living. So the extension of the energy price cap until the end of June, measures like you've mentioned, like freezing fuel duty, actually at the level that it was set last year, which was 5 pence lower. So you've got those sort of measures happening, but then that focus on that longer term growth. And again, you just heard Andy Verity there outline some of the things that the Chancellor has announced in terms of allowing businesses to offset against their tax they pay on their profits, some of the investment, the measure that the Chancellor has announced to do that. Now, that may also, but we don't know yet, go some way to addressing concerns within the Conservative Party among some Conservative MPs who had really wanted to see tax cuts. They're particularly concerned about the corporation tax rise. That's the tax on the profits that companies pay, going up from 19% to 25%. So will that measure that the Chancellor has announced be enough to calm then? As he's still speaking, actually still setting out more measures, so we will bring you those as we have them.
Yes, indeed. Many thanks. Helen Catt there reporting from the Commons. Well, as Helen said, the Chancellor is still on his feet. There you can see delivering the budget. We'll return to that story with more analysis and reaction later in the programme. Well, while Mr Hunt has been speaking, protesters, including thousands of members of the NEU Teachers Union, have been taking part in a demonstration in central London over demands for higher pay. It's part of a strike today and tomorrow in England. The government says the strike is completely unnecessary. Our education correspondent Hazel Shearing reports.
What fruit have you got, Ernest? Right, come here, Mum, we'll chop them up.
Rachel Harrison has only had a few hours of sleep before it's time to get Ernie and Olive up and ready for school.
Can you get me a chopping board out, please?
She and her husband Matt work in the NHS and arrange their shifts to make sure one of them is always around to look after them.
You've got 10 minutes to get some of this fruit down you. I finished at midnight last night. Matt's got up and gone to work at 6 o'clock this morning, so only like a small gap, but then we haven't seen each other because he's been asleep.
When we visited Rachel last week in Stoke-on-Trent, she had been planning ahead for walkouts today and tomorrow, when school will be closed.
Who came last night, Olive, to our house?
To Fairy.
Like so many families across England, they have been juggling their plans.
It is disruptive to the children. On the other hand, you do understand really why they've decided to strike. They're expected to do more and more and more with less and less and less.
Instead of the usual drop-off, Ernie and Olive will be spending the day at a friend's house.
There we go, have a good day.
Nearly all of the teachers here at St Mary's Church of England Primary School will be on strike. So how difficult a decision has it been to close the school?
The vast majority of our families are from deprived backgrounds, so it's been really tough. We've got to look at the bigger picture, that in some schools, teachers are buying their own glue sticks, teachers are buying their own pencils, and teachers shouldn't be working 60-hour weeks. If they are, then they should be being paid for it.
This morning, teachers on a picket line outside a primary school in Leeds said they wanted any pay rise to be fully funded so that it doesn't come out of school budgets.
I'm not striking for my pay packet. I'm striking for the impact that it's having on schools and the children that we serve. The workload that is really pushing people out of the profession is the workload beyond the classroom, the mental health work that we're doing with children, the child protection work that we're doing with children. Teachers are leaving in droves, and it's not because they don't care, it's because they just can't take it anymore.
The NEU says it can organise further strikes between now and summer, but it depends on what happens with talks. The union says it will compare any improved offer that is made with those put forward in Scotland and Wales and decide from there.
There is growing pressure after talks in Scotland and Wales resulted in strike dates being called off.
We've suspended the action in Wales. It's the government ministers who aren't around the table, who won't talk to us. They've got this new precondition that we have to pause strike action before they'll even talk.
What do we want? When do we want it?
As teachers gather in London for a rally this afternoon, the government says it is disappointing that children's education is being disrupted and has called again for the strikes to be paused. Hazel Shearing, BBC News.
Well, along with teachers, junior doctors in England are also on strike on their third and final day of action over pay and conditions. During Monday and Tuesday, NHS managers reported that A&E units were busy as senior staff covered for striking doctors. Also taking part in strikes today are drivers on London Underground, civil servants in various government departments and BBC local radio staff. The time is 13 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. Jeremy Hunt delivers his first budget as Chancellor with a focus on boosting growth and getting people back to work. And coming up, a company of wolves, how growing numbers across Europe are causing concern amongst farmers.
And on Reporting Scotland, we'll have more on the budget and what that means for you here in Scotland. And the UK government says it does not accept that a Sikh activist from Dumbarton was tortured by Indian police while being detained on terror charges.
A number of cliffside homes in Norfolk have been lost to the sea because of coastal erosion. Just this weekend, 3 houses were demolished after high tides and 2 more are earmarked to be pulled down in the seaside resort of Hemsby. One resident is even trying to save his property by physically removing it. Well, today, around 2,000 tonnes of rock are expected to arrive to try to shore up the coastline, as Joe Black reports.
For decades, this part of the Norfolk coast has been slipping away. For the residents here in Hemsby, coastal erosion is nothing new, but sometimes Mother Nature can be unpredictable, and the recent bad weather and high tides have made their mark. Over the weekend, sections of these chalet-style houses started to go into the water, and some were totally demolished before that could happen. School teacher Sue saw her house pulled down at the weekend. She knew erosion was a problem and couldn't get insurance for the property, but loved living in this location.
The benefits of seeing that every day, the sun and the water, and like I said, 99% of the time the erosion was very, very slow. It was a very unique place to be.
Lance Martin moved here in 2017. At that point, he had 50 metres of sand dune behind his property. A year later, he dragged his house forward, and now he's hoping to do it again to escape the threat of the sea.
I've heard this morning that I've been put down as number one on the demolition list, which is a bit worrying and upsetting, obviously. I can only work as fast as the people can get the machinery to me. I can't do anything else, so I'm at their behest at the moment.
We're actually, demolishing people's homes, whether it be your second home or your main home, and the devastation that caused, the upset and everything, and I do really feel sorry for these people. But obviously, safety comes into play.
In the last 10 years, more than 20 properties have gone from these dunes, and now access to another 20 homes could be under threat if the damage to this road gets any worse. 1,900 tonnes of rock will be brought in to slow the erosion, a temporary measure, and a bigger wall of rock is planned for the future. The government has allocated £36 million over 6 years in places like North Norfolk to help communities adapt to a changing climate. But for some, the dream of living next to the sea is now over. Jo Black, BBC News in Hemsby.
RAF and German fighter jets have intercepted a Russian aircraft near Estonian airspace in the first joint operation of its kind. The two Typhoons were scrambled yesterday to a refuelling aircraft flying between St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. The White House says that the MQ-9 Reaper drone lost in the Black Sea yesterday after an incident with Russian aircraft may never be recovered. Su-27 fighters intercepted the drone, which the Pentagon said was on a routine intelligence mission in international airspace. The US said one of the Russian jets hit the drone's propeller, forcing it to be ditched into the sea. The government in Malawi says attempts are being made to reach all parts of the country devastated by Tropical Storm Freddy. The Information Minister, Moses Kunkuyu, said helicopters were flying to areas cut off by swollen rivers and mudslides and appealed to neighbours for help. More than 200 people are known to have died and almost 20,000 have been displaced by the flooding. Now, this may surprise you. The number of wolves in Europe and the area that they roam in is growing. Some people, such as conservationists, welcome the news. Others, including farmers, say it's deeply alarming. Around 19,000 wolves are thought to be living across 27 European countries. The impact on farmers has led some members of the European Parliament to push to reduce the legal protections presently in place for wolves. This report from our correspondent, Jessica Parker.
On heathland in the east of Belgium, a pack of wolves is on patrol. Curious about a camera set up to track them.
And we're just looking
Searching for signs of wolves in the area, Jan, a researcher, knows exactly what to look for.
So this is wolf feces?
This is wolf feces, yeah. And what remains after the rain is just some hairs of the prey.
Why are their numbers growing in Europe, and why are they back in Belgium for the first time in over 100 years?
Yeah. The reason why they're back is mainly legal protection. From the early 90s, really a lot has happened in Europe, and the wolves really started to disperse all over the continent.
The wolves sometimes roam here in Bainven Forest, and this is one of the cameras that is keeping an eye on them. There's up to 40 of these across this part of eastern Belgium, and it tracks the wolves' movements, their well-being, whether they might have been injured, as well as their numbers throughout the year.
But also traceable are the rising attacks on livestock. That's led EU lawmakers to challenge the wolf's protected status.
Come.
Johan, a farmer, says he's lost dozens of sheep and that current compensation fails to cover the true cost.
Every morning when we go look to the sheep, to the field, you are afraid to find some sheep killed.
Some people might say you just need to build a better fence.
Yes, what have you do no more? We can use more wires, use more sticks, but I don't think that there is a wolf-proof fence doesn't exist. The wolf is so smart, he overwins every fence.
Here in its jaws, a wolf holds a baby wild boar. Its mother gives chase, but it's too late. Wolves are predators, with warnings their growing numbers in Europe cannot go unchecked.
Here we have another wolf print.
But why are they a positive thing? Why is it positive that they're back?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, you need to maybe also ask if everything has to have like a positive effect on the way we see it as humans. Some animals also just have a right to exist, not just because we find them useful.
These evasive creatures can be hard to spot, but across this densely populated region, their presence is getting noticed. Jessica Parker, BBC News in Belgium.
Let's go back to the budget now. While we've been on the air, more has been unveiled. I'm joined again by our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. What's happened, Andy?
Well, nothing much on tax, actually, Reeta, so far. Mostly spending measures, and in particular, measures to help people get back to work. We're hearing from Jeremy Hunt that there's going to be a new scheme called Universal Support, which will aim to help people who are disabled or have long-term health conditions get back into work, spending £4,000 per person. So that's a chunky measure and part of the whole sort of back to work proposition that we help 7 million people economically inactive, meaning they're neither in work nor looking for work, to get back to the workplace or to get into the workplace in the first place. So those are the big measures. And we're also hearing about measures, for example, to raise spending. We heard about measures to try to limit inflation, although those will only have a small effect on inflation. Most of it's coming down anyway because of oil and gas prices. But it's all a big unannounced move to change the benefit system to help people back into work.
OK, thank you very much, Andy. Andy Verity there. Well, as we heard, the Chancellor has announced a series of measures designed to help families coping with the cost of living crisis, including more help with childcare and energy support. Our correspondent Phil Mackey is in Sandwell for us now. Phil.
Yes, Rita, in the Hayden Hill Leisure Centre, which is in Cradley Heath in Sandwell. So we're in the heart of the Black Country, a particularly interesting political battleground because traditionally very Labour, but in the 2019 general election, 2 of the seats became Conservative for the first time in over 80 years, an area that voted strongly for Brexit and a key battleground in the next general election. There's been some announcements from the Chancellor today specifically about the West Midlands. In fact, Tipton, a town about 5 miles from here, will get a big regeneration project in its town centre. There's more money, sort of spending power really for the West Midlands Mayor, Andy Street. And of course, we're in a leisure centre. That swimming pool money will help here, not least because part of the ceiling fell in here yesterday, so it's out of action at the moment. But I've got a couple of businesses represented here. Anne-Marie Simpson from Simpson's Gin. What do you make of what you've heard so far?
I think mixed for us. So good news on the duty on beer. So that's a very small part of what we sell in the bar. For the gin company that we have, 10 Legs Gin, it obviously doesn't make such a huge difference. I think generally for consumers, it's really good news on the energy price guarantee. I wish it would have a little bit more for business because in our experience, it's that real need for business to have a bit more certainty on their energy costs, and glass manufacturers, etc., that we work with are really struggling with the cost of energy. Last week we heard one of our suppliers go under principally around energy costs, so very difficult. So I would have liked to seen a little bit more on commercial energy prices. It's certainty and consistency for us, so we need customers to be comfortable and confident about spending. So I think a lot in the future coming forwards around the investment zones, etc., should help, but a little bit down the line.
Okay. Sean Suku also here from the food division, which is a contract catering company. I should say that we've missed the last 15 minutes of the Chancellor, so he might have said something fantastic. We don't know that. I think you're happy about the energy prices because that's a big concern for you. But was there anything else in there for you at the beginning of the budget statement?
Unfortunately not. I was hoping, again, like you said, for a little bit of an injection of optimism for us SMEs, stuff a lot more business orientated. Hopefully for the rest of the budget, when I get to catch up on the rest of it, there'll be something that's a little bit more tangible that we can walk away from and be a little bit optimistic about. But of course, just having some kind of forecastable understanding of where our energy costs are going to be. Are there going to be any more caps on import?
Okay. Thanks very much, Sean and Marie. And thanks to you guys in the back. Lots of heavy lifting to do as well, obviously, for the Chancellor, if he's going to make people here pleased about what he has to say. We're here for the rest of the day. You can watch us on the BBC News channel and on the special over on BBC Two.
Phil, many thanks. Phil Mackey reporting. Let's get a final word from our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's in Westminster for us. Helen, I heard one of your colleagues earlier saying the Chancellor would want this to be a steady as she goes, possibly even boring budget. Is it?
Well, so far, no massive surprises, although in the last few minutes, the Chancellor has said that he's going to go further than we thought on lifetime allowances on pensions and completely abolish the limit on that. So perhaps that's the most surprising thing he's thrown in so far. Most of the last 10 minutes or so, he's been talking about his plans to get people back into the workforce, talking about reforming the disability benefits system to scrap or abolish the work capability assessments and strengthening sanctions on universal credit claimants who do not have health issues. But of course, it's when you start to see the real detail, it starts to be picked apart, that we'll really know how this budget is going down.
OK, many thanks. Helen Catt reporting from Westminster. And for more on the budget, you can, of course, continue watching coverage on BBC Two and on the BBC News channel. And online, there's more analysis at bbc.co.uk/news on what today's budget means for you. OK, time for a look at the weather now. I'm joined by Chris Fawkes. Chris.
Hi Rita, we're seeing some big swings in temperatures this week, and first signs of a change back to milder weather is actually spotted in this Weather Watch picture. This halo you can see here is caused by ice crystals high up in the Earth's atmosphere that are part of this cloud that's coming in off the Atlantic at the moment. The air gets really mild. In this zone, a second pulse coming in for tomorrow, and that will really boost the temperatures. So after a really cold start this morning with temperatures down at -10, the temperatures will continue to rise through today, tonight and into tomorrow. So we'll get a really big jump up in temperatures from what's a relatively chilly day today, 7 or 8 degrees Celsius typically, to around 14 or 15 degrees Celsius tomorrow. It is going to feel a lot milder. Now, weather-wise, we are starting to lose the best of the sunshine as that cloud continues to thicken, and out west we've got rain moving in. I've seen a bit of snow over some of the hills in Northern Ireland, but ultimately it will turn back to rain as the air continues to get milder. Temperatures around 7 or 8 degrees typically today, so it is quite cool for a March day. But during this evening, some of that rain bumps into the cold air. We'll start to see a spell of hill snow across northern England and Scotland. The snow lasting longest in the hills to the north of the central belt. So there could be just 1 or 2 issues here. But eventually, we will see that milder weather push in. Here's that second pulse of milder air coming up later in the night. And that will boost temperatures to around 9 or 10 degrees Celsius quite widely. So a mild end to the night, but still relatively cool for the far north of Scotland. Now for Thursday, we've got low pressure in charge, bringing with it mild air and southwesterly winds. So, yes, a mild kind of day, but there will be lots of rain around. The rain will be heavy enough to cause some localised surface water flooding issues. The weather brightens up in Northern Ireland, but here, some heavy showers working in through the afternoon. You might even find some of them turning thundery, maybe something a bit brighter at times for East Anglia and the southeast. A mild day, though, temperatures up to 14 or 15 degrees Celsius. It's going to feel completely different to the weather that we have around today. Friday, we've still got those southwesterly winds with us. Could have quite a lengthy spell of rain potentially across eastern areas of England, but otherwise I think a lot of cloud around with bursts of fairly heavy rain, particularly across western areas of the country, and temperatures around 14, 15, even a 16 there in Newcastle, very mild for March. The weekend weather prospects, a lot of cloud around on Saturday, still with outbreaks of rain. Sunday probably a little bit brighter, but still the threat of seeing some rain. But it's relatively mild, I suppose, with temperatures into double figures. However, it looks like the colder air into next week will start to return its way southwards. So further big swings in temperatures on the way, Rita.
OK, thank you, Chris. And a reminder now of our top story. Jeremy Hunt delivers his first budget as Chancellor with a focus on boosting growth and getting people back to work.
I deliver that today by removing obstacles that stop businesses investing, by tackling labour shortages that stop them recruiting, by breaking down barriers that stop people working, and by harnessing British ingenuity to make us a science and technology superpower.
And you can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel. That's it from me. Goodbye.
The headlines on Reporting Scotland this Wednesday.